Welcome everyone to LitSalon Prose Talk Prose. I'm Marla Miller, your host for our second season of a show that I launched last year because I wanted a place where new authors could interface with authors who have been around the block a few times. Last year I was thrilled that I had people like Jane Smiley and several others who, Brett Battles, who was a traditional author and he went indie. I'm really trying to do with LitSalon is have a showcase for authors to learn from each other, to share what works, what doesn't work. For season 2, I'm just delighted to have a New York writer who has been, I think, publishing since 1990. Her name is Catherine Hiller. I think her first 2 books were published by St. Martin's. Catherine's writing arc is interesting because she has written both fiction and nonfiction, I think, equally. But I'm going to ask her to answer those kinds of questions. So I hope that you all will welcome Catherine Hiller as I am to LitSalon Prose Talk Prose. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you very much, Marla. I'm delighted to be here in such distinguished company.
Thank you very much. We are, it's a show that is developing an audience. And I think that because those of us who have been in the writing life for a while really appreciate the knowledge that we get, the learning that we get from authors who have been around the block as many times as some very distinguished people have been. And so, and I think one of the problems with indie, I love indie publishing, but one of the problems with it is I think that arc that we had to climb isn't quite as steep. And I think there's something to be said about climbing a steep arc because at the end of it, you get better and better. Would you agree with that, Catherine?
Well, I'm not really sure. I think it might be different for everybody and for every age. I just want you to know that actually I began publishing way earlier than you say, in '79.
You did?
I had these 2 children's books in '79 and '80.
You did?
I did. So here's one, Argentavi and the Boonie.
Uh-huh.
The other is Abracadabby.
I love it.
And pretty soon, in about, I think 1980, I published my first novel, which was a paperback original. And that's called An Old Friend from High School. And like many, first-time novelists, this was loosely based on something that had happened to me.
Uh-huh.
And I enjoyed writing it. It was a paperback original, and it was fun to do. But
and what year was that, Catherine?
What's that?
What year was that?
No, let's find out. Hmm. 1970.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
so you have been writing for a long time. May I ask you what got you into the writing life, just briefly, as we go through your many publications?
It seems inevitable for a writer. It just is what you do. Throughout my life, people always encouraged me. When I would write, it was very frustrating in college. I would write about something that I thought was really important, with great ideas, and the comments were always so well written. And I would think, get over the well-written part. Tell me about my ideas, my philosophy, what I've added to the conversation. But, okay, I've had to settle for well-written.
Absolutely. And so from college, did you just launch into the writing life, or did you have a day job that sustained you?
No, I always knew it would be difficult to be just a writer. So I went and I got a PhD at Brown. And I thought I would be an academic.
Oh.
But that didn't work out. There weren't any jobs in the cities, the only 2 cities I could live. I was then married to a film editor, so it was New York or LA.
Oh.
There were no jobs in those places. So it turned out to be very fortunate, Marla. I would have been a complete disaster in an academic setting. When I consider the years of politically correct indoctrination and so on, and structuralism, I would have just been miserable, absolutely miserable.
Interesting, Catherine. I did not know that about you when I researched you, and we talked briefly before this show. I didn't know that about you, but I should say that I should have said at the beginning of this that the book that brought you to LitSalon Prose Talk Prose is called Just Say Yes, a Marijuana Memoir. So when you're talking about your activism and you're talking about your politically correctness in the academic setting, no, you probably would not have done well there.
No.
That's fabulous. And so, Catherine, let's talk a little bit then about voice, if you don't mind, because you said that you have been an activist, that you're a passionate woman. Writers tend to be very passionate people. Not all of us, but some of us. Are many of your books themed with a message about the universe, about society, about mores, etc.? Where do you pull your material from?
Well, none of my books, except for this last one, which has brought me a certain notoriety, have ever been message books. I tell stories like any novelist, and I tell stories to entertain myself. And hopefully, through these stories, other people will be entertained and moved and get a greater understanding of things. So, it never occurred to me that any of my novels would have a message.
Okay.
This latest book
yes.
is all message because it's nonfiction. And I wanted to show that it was possible to smoke a lot of pot and still have a happy life. So, the sound bite that got people interested, and by people I mean media, was nothing to do with the book, only to do with the bio. So the last line of this bio, I listed, my degrees and my books and so on. But the last line is what got everyone's attention. She has smoked marijuana almost every day for the past 50 years. That did it. Every headline was smoking for 50 years and not hurt, or 50 years a doper. That did it.
Still looking good.
Thank you. Yes, I got a little of that too.
That's great. And so could you talk a little bit about the press leading, because I know it was a real exciting time for you prior to the publication of Just Say Yes, a Marijuana Memoir, which was published on April 20th, 2015, which for
a date that many people will know.
So for those who don't know about 420, would you mind just talking a little bit about that, and then the press leading up to the publication date, because it's a great story.
Well, 420, which is what April 20th looks like written numerically, is a traditional time, or has been in marijuana lore, a time when people start smoking pot. I think it's good to resist smoking until about that time, because most dope makes you kind of tired. So if you're smoking all day, you'd be tired. It devolved from a group of high school. This is what the myth is. The creation myth of 420 is a bunch of high school students would get together at 420 in a certain high school, and they'd set off for a private place where they could smoke pot. As it turns out, I was so amused when my middle child said that, he and his high school friends would smoke pot in a place that was sort of scrubby by the railroad tracks called the berylliums. The berylliums? What's that? Well, there was a lot of this poison beryllium or whatever kind of metal there, and we just thought it was a hoot. So he actually contributed the story to my website, which is called marijuanamemoir.com. And I asked for people to send in their stories. Wonderful. So his is just one of the better stories on the site.
And will you be doing may I ask, will you be doing a collection of those stories, Catherine? Because that sounds like
probably not. No, I don't think so.
Okay, so you're going to know. So leading up to the publication on 4/20/2015, talk a little bit about the press, because that's when you came across my radar.
Yeah, of course.
In the New York Times.
Luckily, I was really helped. First of all, you have to realize that this was an indie press called HeliotropeBooks. They publish about 10 books a year, and a friend of mine who was about to be published suggested that I send them something, and they have a very hilarious submissions policy, I think. This is a very tiny operation. How are they going to sift through huge numbers of manuscripts? It's hard enough for them to just get out there, 8 to 10 a year. So you can only submit if you're a friend of one of their authors. Period. So that cuts it right down, right? So she can.
It does.
They can deal with it that way. So when she took the book on, I kind of knew because of the timing that this book had a shot at doing fairly well. So for the first time ever, I hired a publicist. And this was
Okay.
taking a big risk because you could hire a publicist and, get almost nothing from it. No matter how hard the publicist works, they're up against every other publicist.
Mhm.
My publicist was very effective. First of all, I got very lucky. I submitted the first chapter of my book to the New York Times to their op-ed pages. So you probably didn't read that one, Marla, but if you had
I
gotten the
did.
physical New York Times, which is a real right of a Sunday right, let's just say for the people who live in the New York area, the most interesting section to me is the opinion section. And right there on page 2 was chapter 1 of my book. And they called it How I Buy Weed. So
Really?
that got a lot of buzz. Just that alone got lots of people contacting me and asking, and people who were smoking and were thrilled that this was in there. Also, it got a huge number of comments at the New York Times. 3 weeks later, this was followed up by this incredible interview, and this was thanks to my publicist,
Okay.
by David Gonzalez of the New York Times. He's a wonderful reporter, and he was fairly interested in the topic. And when he heard that metric, 50 years, almost every day, he was very interested.
So
So,
he called you?
pardon?
Did he call you?
No, my publicist initially
Okay.
did it all, and it took a fair amount of calling back and forth and will
Sure.
you and when you and will you. He said finally, look, it has to be, I have to have the first interview. I said, no problem, you'll have the first interview. But finally I just called him directly and said, David, when? So he came over the following week, and then he wanted to photograph me in Prospect Park where I'd smoked my first joint as
Wow.
as a 17-year-old, right? So
Wow.
we went back there and we found a cool location, and he took this terrific picture and he wrote a terrific piece. And I think because it was in the news section of the paper rather than the arts page or the book page or whatever, it got a lot of notice.
Yes.
People, just the way I described on Sunday, many people in New York just have to read every page or at least turn it over in the news section. So as soon as that was published, neighbors were scurrying over when they would see me. They said, oh, I saw this about you. I didn't know this about you. Well, haven't you offered me any? It's a lot of fun. So that was very cool.
I,
And that led to a whole lot more media inquiries, reader interest, and so on. And so every time I would have another big interview, such as in Marie Claire or in Yahoo Health, there would be a huge spike to my website.
really.
And so this was a lot of fun, naturally.
You,
I had
and
craved, some kind of attention from the world ever since I wrote my first book 40 years ago. Come on, this is what writers expect. Once they've had a few books out, they don't expect it anymore, but they kind of hope. And
you know what?
so
I love your honesty. That's just so refreshing to hear that, Catherine, because you're absolutely right. It is we write because we have to write our stories, but we want people to read them.
yeah, we do. We do. And I think that's what people have picked up from this book, that there is a lot of honesty there. And I really tried, even made myself look bad several times, I'm sure, but I felt I had to tell my personal truth about this. If I was going to say it hasn't harmed me, I have to go back and say, yes, but, it makes my eyes red. It's something I've sometimes felt guilty about. I've had to sneak around when the kids were young.
Mhm.
It's not all just fun. There have been some negatives too. And I thought it would only be valuable if I was as utterly honest as I could possibly be.
Catherine, can I ask you we could obviously talk about any one of your books in detail, but since Just Say Yes, a Marijuana Memoir is currently on the shelves and being purchased, can I ask you a little bit about writing the memoir and what provoked you to do that, knowing that it probably was going to be risky business given that we're in the political state that we're in now, in a good state for marijuana, but we're not it's not, it's still a conflicted issue. So what was the motivation?
No one had done it before. There
Okay.
had been no marijuana memoir. No
Yeah.
one had come out, personally identified themselves as a longtime user. You know what a magnet that is for a writer, to find a subject that hasn't been done and done to death. So that was it. When I realized, I could tell a story that was representative of many people's stories, as I've learned when people write to me. They say,
Yes.
"Oh, you're my twin," or "You've led my life," or "I can't believe you're saying this. This is me." So I found out there are an awful lot of secret smokers. You mentioned, by the way, that this book is, you could buy it on the shelf. No, you really do have to go to Amazon. I have
Okay.
a tiny publisher. She has no sales rep out there, even
Gotcha.
Barnes and Nobles, unless it was one of the places where I read this summer, in
Gotcha.
spring.
And I think that that's probably an important thing, as long as, we're talking about the business of publishing on LitSalon, that when you go with a small press, chances are your distribution is going to be quite limited, and you're going to have to work very, very, very hard to get that book in places that you want it in. Is that a correct assessment?
That's a correct assessment. I think it's true of any press publication, by the
I
way, that you could be with Random House
I
and still
agree.
have to work, and probably hire your own publicist, because their publicist can give you half an hour or something. I
That's
heard an
right.
extraordinary thing from an industry insider, Marla. Let me share this with you because
Please do.
it's just quite amazing. Apparently, in this day and age, half of Random House books sell less than 300 copies.
I don't doubt
Half
it.
of them. Isn't
I
that stunning?
it absolutely is stunning, and it's probably one of the reasons why the industry has kind of imploded on itself, with, I'm guessing, a lot of excess, and decision making that wasn't in the best interest of the sheer volume of authors that they have been, publishing over the last couple of decades. That
Yeah.
mid-list author, as you know, Catherine, is no more in traditional publishing. The mid-list is now an indie author because
Yeah.
they,
No,
you
they're
know,
looking for the big bestseller, which is the only thing that
that's
keeps them
it.
afloat. So if it doesn't even have a potential, they probably are not going to be interested. I
It,
will say
yeah,
though that it's important to make a distinction between self-publishing and an indie press, only
please
that
do.
it's awfully hard to get any media attention if it's self-published. Many places won't review it at all. You
Okay.
cannot give a reading at a bookstore. They don't want to have anything to do with it. So no matter how small your publisher is, it's probably better for your career to go with that, even if you're going to make less money, than to self-publish.
I can't I can't emphasize that enough, Catherine, and I'm really very grateful that you said that. I just finished teaching at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, and the issue of small press versus self-publishing is a hot topic, and
Mm-hmm.
rightfully so. I'm leaning toward supporting finding those small presses. And by the way, I like Heliotrope Books. I think the publisher of that small press is just terrific. She works very, very hard. And that's not, I have no associate, that's not even associating her with you. I'm impressed with her
Oh,
professional.
that's very nice. I'll tell her. I'm giving a
Yes,
reading with other heliotrope
absolutely.
authors.
Absolutely, but I think that because we have small presses out there, one of the things that authors need to do is, how did you decide upon heliotrope? And I think the risk is that the press may be here today but gone tomorrow. And where does that leave the author? So would you address that a little bit if you can?
Well, I really haven't been in that situation.
Okay.
I really can't
Did you
address that.
worry
Of
about
course, it's a risk, but life is risk. And you were talking about, let's get back to just say yes, because I forgot to deal with
good?
something. And I do want to dispel this another myth that has grown a little bit, which is how very brave I am. Whoops.
There you go.
Okay. Oh, sorry. It was telling me I have only 10% battery left. I was
Uh-oh.
trying to charge it up before, Marla. I have an
Well, you
iPhone
know what?
9 just in case, but
I will
okay.
tell you, Catherine, before you continue, we've got like about 5 to 6 minutes left, so that should do it.
Oh my goodness. All
But
right.
go
So I
ahead.
just wanted to say, I'll just say this about just say yes and hope that
Yes.
people buy my marijuana memoir, but it didn't take that much courage, Marla, because, okay, I'm identifying myself as a pot smoker. And if the people in my town, and I'm very careful never to mention the town in which I live, I don't want to wave a flag in front of our local authorities. But supposing they decided to come after me and they came to my house and they found some grass, they would find a little bit of weed. It would be less than an ounce because I never have more. and I would get $100 fine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's very courageous. Sorry. I don't.
You know, bless you for saying that. One of the things about your book that I really appreciated when I was reading it is that you really did. We don't have to talk about that, but I liked what you did in the book in terms of identifying yourself as a white middle class woman and getting, interfacing with the society in a very different way than, say, someone who was from perhaps another skin color and from another socioeconomic class. You touched on that in
I
just.
did touch on that. Yeah, there was a time when my ex-husband and I, with our kids in the back seat, just had bought our dope for the summer, and this was about 30 years ago. And we were
Yeah.
really excited. I was so excited. I was rolling a joint. And I lit the joint. This is in downtown New York. And suddenly I hear this bullhorn, put out that joint. And it was a policeman in a van next to me looking into our car. And I put out the joint. My God. And I waited, and he went his way, and we went ours. That was the end of the story.
That was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that was,
I'm just saying, it would not have ended that way if
absolutely.
I had been a young black man. No way would that have happened.
Which readers will really appreciate. When I went to the site and I looked at, I read some of the reviews. It's pretty much what people said, that if you want to know about marijuana, that Just Say Yes is a terrific primer, and a lens into the millions of people in this country who have been smoking marijuana for decades. And if you're curious at all, Just Say Yes is definitely a book that you really should download or pick up.
Now, what do you think, Marla? Don't you think more people should come out about it?
I'm hoping that they will, Catherine. That one of my clients is a old Washington Post reporter who's writing his memoir, and 40 Years Stoned, it's called, and they're shopping it. I really wish that people would. I think that what happened just yesterday, here's the thing about, and you know what, maybe we can talk about this and keep it close to publishing, writing to a trend. I'm assuming you did not write to a trend.
No, because I wrote the beginning of this book 8 years ago. Good. Nobody was interested at all. And I kept, every couple of years I'd bring it out. Nobody was interested. And actually, Marla, I decided to self-publish it. But then I heard about Heliotrope. I mean, I just didn't want to go to the whole agent rejection and the whole long process. And I was very glad that Heliotrope published it. But if we only have a couple of minutes, can I tell you another great theme of my life?
As long as your battery's cooking, girlfriend, we can talk. So it's up to you.
Okay. Well, I did want to say that for a long time, writing about sex was a great interest to me. And so it helped me get the best thing of my literary life, which was a quote from John Updike. So I have this book of short stories.
Hold it up.
I'm looking for it, Marla. Oh, no, I can't believe it's the one thing I don't have with me, but it's called Skin, Sensual Tales. And Updike wrote that I write with, good, brave, and joyful writing, he wrote. So I was over the moon. That was wonderful.
How did you get?
I'm very frank in that book about sex. I'm also very frank in this book called Sybil in Between. Look at that racy cover. Oh, my goodness. And no, I was not the model. Anyway, this is a woman torn between two men. One and she's seeing them both at the same time. She's a youngish divorcee, about 45, let's say. And one of the guys is very lovely and solid and beautiful and sort of angelic. And the other one is this scientist, which is the bad boy who, leads her into mild S&M, and she's very interested in that.
And did that come out before 50 Shades?
Way before.
Right. May I ask you, as an author, did you try and dovetail when 50 Shades came out? Did you reissue that? Did you try and get some? No. Okay.
No. On to the next. The next book I was trying to publicize was this book, The Adventures of Sid Sawyer. And this is a retelling of the adventures of Tom Sawyer. And I have always been enamored of the adventures of Tom Sawyer. In my mind, that is childhood, to be on a river and to be floating and to be having adventures. So I wanted to go back into that world, but from different eyes. So I make it from the eyes of his younger brother, Sid, who in my book is not a sissy tattletale, but is a brilliant kid who's seeing inside what Tom Sawyer, that Tom Sawyer is really a bully, that his town is really ignorant, you know. So this was sort of exciting. I mean, writers are inspired in part by other books. And so
Would you
this book
would you consider
inspired
that
me.
a fan fiction book?
Oh, it is totally fiction.
Okay. Okay. Well, fan fiction is something that kind of
Oh,
bypasses
fan
me.
fiction. No, this is, well, I'm Mark Twain's fan. I
Okay.
never thought of it, Marla. I suppose I am writing fan fiction.
It
But
kind of
look,
sounds like fan fiction to me.
do
And
you think the Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys is fan fiction because it's based on Jane Eyre?
I don't know. Do you?
No. No, and
Okay.
I don't really consider this fan fiction either. But
Got it.
it's an interesting frame, Marla. I never thought of it. Maybe.
Interesting. You know, one of the things that I tell people about writing sex is that they really should try and, if you want to write sex, and I went through a period where I really was trying to infuse it in all of my storytelling, I realized that I needed to write it so much that I decided to write erotica. And it was a great thing to do because I put it all in one place. And I'm guessing that those couple of books is perhaps what you did.
Well,
If you could write about,
perhaps not, because most of my books have, you know, an old friend from high school is about a young woman happily married who falls in love with her old girlfriend from high
so you like
school.
sex, Catherine? Is that what
Like
you?
sex. I like sex. This book, 17 Morton Street. This was a Book of the Month Club. Remember Book of the Month Club?
Yes,
This
I
was an
do.
alternate selection, and this was all about, well, one of the women has a huge crush on someone, is constantly fantasizing. This is about yearning. One of them hires a young, handsome au pair to take care of her children. So there's a lot of sex in this book too. I'm inspired by it. What can I tell you? A
Well,
lot of my short stories, and in fact, I might want to put out a short story collection with all about appealing older women who are somehow sexually engaged. I wrote a short story called Her Last Affair that was published in a very good place. What was it? The Antioch Review, I think. Anyway, it had a very nice publication, but it was subversive. And here was this woman about to turn 60, and she's realizing that she's probably not going to have erotic adventures anymore, you know, but what about this last one? What is it doing to her? What is it bringing to her? What is she hiding from her lover? I would
and
have
so
to write that.
okay, I'm gonna press you on this a little bit. In the beginning of this interview, I thought what you said was that you didn't thematically that you didn't write about things that you wanted to explore. That
I didn't?
that they didn't come from your own interest in exploring stuff. With your, so maybe I got that wrong, because it sounds to me like your fiction and your nonfiction, that you grab something that you want to really dig into, and I guess that's the tutorial that I want listeners to take away from that we grab stuff that we perhaps know a little bit about and want to know more about, and that's why we storytell. Would you agree with that?
Yes, completely agree with that. All I meant, Marla, was in the other books, I didn't say, I am writing this book so the world will understand bisexuality. And it never came from that. It came from, oh, this kind of happened a little to me, but if I push it and make it better and make it more exciting and introduce you know, then it'll be interesting to other people. And I'll tell the story as well as I possibly can. And I wanted to say also that with writing the memoir, I was amazed at how similar it was.
A little bit about it.
Yeah, just a little bit about that was, I wanted to write it with scenes. And when you have scenes, you have character, then you have setting, and you have detail. And all of these things are what you do when you're writing fiction. You know, obviously you're much more limited in a memoir. And I didn't want to write a standard memoir. I was born, and so I wrote it backwards. It starts off with me at my present age, and it ends when I'm a little girl of 8, and being asked a very challenging question by my stepdad, which really was a formative question for my life. But I'm not going to say anything more.
Where did you get that arc? Did that just come to you while you were just thinking about how to present this?
You know where I got it?
Where?
After being rejected for many years, this idea of this marijuana book where everything goes well, it was all like, but you didn't end up in prison. You didn't end up in the street. There's nothing going on here. People are going to expect something terrible to happen to you, and you just float along. So to make sure that people didn't have that expectation, I did it backward. So they're not expecting, you know, they see me now, fairly content and so on. And then I just keep getting younger and younger as the book progresses.
That's
That's all. So that was the reason why, but also, as I told you before, what's a magnet for a writer? What hasn't been done? I have never read a memoir that goes backward. So I had to do it.
that's fascinating, and I hope that that's another takeaway that listeners, just think about, because
Marla, at my end, we've just frozen. I don't know what's happening. Can you hear me? Well, I don't know what to say, Marla. It's not happening here. Okay, we're back. Are we back, Marla? I'm not seeing you.
LitSalon Prose Talk Prose. And should you like this show, would you please share it so that other people know that we're out here trying to give authors a platform. Thank you. Be well, and until we meet again, keep writing and reading.